I'm 14 and I had an extremely creepy experience with someone I wish to forget. I frequented a small local grocery store. They had a brand of coffee drinks in the back that I particularly enjoyed. I never had any problems there, just went in, got my coffee, and gave the clerk a $5. You'd think with a routine as simple as that, nothing could possibly go wrong, right? Sadly, that's incorrect. One day, I went in hankering for a vanilla flavor of the coffee I liked. I made my way through the usual aisles of the store, passing the seasoning and spices section, then the chips aisle, before making my way to the back where they stored milk, eggs, etc. Just as I was opening the cold door to grab my coffee, I noticed a large shape next to me just behind the door. I could tell it was a man from the shape, but the condensation on the door was blocking any detail. Instinctively, I shut the door, having never grabbed my coffee. Then I took in the sight of the strange man. His hair was long and as black as it was straight. It appeared greasy, just like his skin. He looked to be in his late 20s and was immediately off-putting. Then he spoke to me. "Got any change?" he asked in a voice I could barely hear. No, I managed to say. "I don't keep any cash on me." I lied. This is something I saw my dad say to a homeless person once, though he was honest when he said it. "Don't you lie to me, you little piece of garbage," he said in a lowered tone now, and I could tell he was mad. "I've seen you come in here before," he hissed at me. Not knowing what to say and terrified, I turned and ran back to the entrance. He never followed, but I still ran the entire way back home. As the weeks passed by, I soon stopped thinking about the incident. Though I never forgot about it. How could I? It was so unexpected and weird. Well, one evening I was chilling in my room. I had my phone next to me on vibrate, right next to my sketchbook. Suddenly it began to go off. Without looking, I picked it up, answered it, and said hello, thinking it was my friend Jacob who I was expecting a call from. "Hi, Stephen." Immediately I recognized the voice. My entire body was chilled, my heart pounding. "How did you get my—" I tried to reply. "There's no kindness left in the world." "How do you know my name?" I shouted at him. "Oh, Stephen, you're a little liar. I don't like it when people lie. You want to know what I do to people who lie?" Quickly, I hung up. Moments later, it began to ring again, but I ignored it, absolutely horrified. Freaking out, I ran to my mom and told her what was happening. We blocked the number via our phone service, and she gave me a good talking to, telling me that if I ever encounter anyone like that again, she needed to know about it immediately, before it got to that point. Luckily for me, nothing has happened since. But considering it was so recent, just a few months ago, I'm still afraid he'll call from a different number. Or worse, appear at my doorstep. Let my experiences serve as a warning to anyone who works for or plans to work for someone delivering pizzas. This happened to me over 3 years ago in spring of 2015. I worked at my local Pizza Hut at the suggestion of a friend who put in a good word for me. I'm a guy and I was 24 back then. The only reason I took the job was because my previous employer had recently passed away and I needed money fast. Anyway, one night I had a creepy and terrifying experience. Because of these experiences, I remember every detail, down to the toppings that were on the freaking pizzas. The first was a regular medium pepperoni pizza to what I assumed were college kids. When I pulled up to the address that I put in my phone, it looked like the kind of house students would rent. The guy that answered the door was middle-aged, and he gave me a bad vibe right away. At one point, the guy tried to invite me inside to accept pay for the order, but I told him I would wait outside like we're supposed to do. Anyway, he got all weird about it. He seemed offended that I denied his offer. He grumbled angrily and then shoved the money in my hand. What was weird about this was, after I had the money in my hand, a woman, either his girlfriend or wife, came to the door, asking me to come inside as well. I gave them both a suspicious look and said, "No, I can't." When I begin to walk to my car, the woman follows me for some reason. I get in my car and she stays a few feet away at the sidewalk. The guy is at the door open with the pizza in his hand, and he's staring too, and they both simply watch me in silence as I drive away. God, that was so eerie. I couldn't help but wonder why they wanted me to come inside, and what would have happened to me if I did. On another occasion, I was out to deliver a medium-sized supreme pizza. I pulled up to the address. It turned out to be a few blocks away from that creepy couple in the previous story, which I remembered clearly at that time and was just trying to get it out of my head. I get out and do the usual delivery stuff. I knock at the door. There's no answer, so I knock again. Then I try the doorbell on the third time. After what seems like ages, I hear a click and another click. One was the door, but I couldn't place what the second click was. The guy who answered looked upset and asked what in the world I wanted. He was so confrontational, I wasn't expecting it. I noticed he was holding something by his leg, and I noticed there was a glint of reflecting metal on it, like it was a blade of some sort. Maybe that had something to do with the click I heard. I had to make sure I stayed calm, as there was no telling what he'd do. I quickly apologized and walked back to my car. When I looked back, he was standing at his door brandishing the blade, as if to say from that distance, "Make that mistake again, boy, and that'll be your last." Who knew delivering pizzas could be so dangerous? I work as a police officer. I have been for a while now. I live in Northern Europe. One evening, my partner and I were patrolling a dark little road. It was pretty quiet that night. Maybe one or two vehicles would pass by every 10 minutes or so. We were driving around, and it was in the middle of a snowstorm. We were talking, enjoying some still steaming coffee we had picked up, when suddenly, something crossed over the middle of the road in front of our vehicle. Something tall, furry, with a head that resembled a wolf. What really bewildered me beyond that was the fact that it didn't cross on 4 legs. I stopped the car, and my partner asked, "Did you see that?" "Yes, I did," I replied. Was that a person? It looked like it had something in its hands." I shook my head. I didn't really know what to say. "Should we go check it out?" he continued. Being curious and stuck on a shift that was extremely slow, we decided to call it in. We walked toward the woods with our flashlights on and hands on our holsters, ready to draw our weapons at any time. We got pretty deep in. By then we saw blue flashing lights, signaling that the other patrol car had arrived. We were a few hundred meters from the road when we found something. Honestly, I thought it was a tree at first, but then it turned to look at us. I saw its glowing yellow eyes, or maybe it was just reflecting our flashlights, and there was blood on its mouth. It did have something in its arm, a person. It let out a horrifying scream, something that reminded me of a car spinning out of control. We were horrified, confused. We aimed at the creature, who was now beginning to walk away, as if it didn't care about our presence. And before we could shoot, someone else did. one of the backup units who found our patrol car and had followed us out into the woods. It screeched again, dropping the person in its arm and running into the woods. We were dumbfounded and petrified. Soon, I was able to turn around and look back at the officer who had fired. He was shaking. He wasn't blinking, he was horrified too, but more than we had been. The guy who had been dropped was on the ground and unconscious, but other than that, he appeared to be fine. We took him back to a patrol car and called an ambulance. The rest of us could not take our eyes off of the surrounding forest, even though nothing came of it after that. When the guy came to in the hospital, he immediately began to cry, asking where his daughter was. The thing is, I know what he's talking about. A missing person case in which the little girl had never been found. I don't know what we were dealing with that night, and I don't know what happened to the man's poor family, but I will be staying away from those woods.
I caught my brother browsing some weird website one night. It had pictures of guns and illegal drugs. He and I are really close, so we don't usually hide things from each other. So when I questioned him, he straight up told me he was buying weed on a website called Mr. Nice Guy Market. I told him that's illegal and that he would obviously get caught. Then he went on about telling me that he's safe and anonymous on the deep web. I assured him that that's complete nonsense, that everything is traceable, but he told me he's already used it at least 10 times and that I can't stop him. So I gave up and watched him make his purchase. He found some new listing of cannabis called The Poison Queen. It had one review which rated it positively. I suggested to him that he find one with more ratings, but he started acting like some kind of pro, telling me to relax. The seller was from the same state as us, which would make for quick delivery, claimed my brother. He did his thing. He used some kind of weird program to encrypt his message to the seller, which included his name, our address, and other info. I reminded him it was a mistake, but he told me everything is fine. About a week later, my brother started getting concerned that he got scammed because there was never any word from the seller. Coincidentally, on that same night, we got a heavy knock at the door. I got nervous that it was the police and that they caught on to my brother's illegal drug purchase, but it turned out to be much worse than just the police. He opened the door, and we were greeted by some sketchy-looking guy with medium-length hair, all fuzzy and messy, a brown, messy beard, a fat belly, and a very obviously fake Rolex on his wrist. He then said my brother's name, and I saw my brother step back a bit. The guy asked my brother if he was the one who bought the weed. My brother didn't know how to answer. All I heard him mumble was, "I thought you would ship it." The guy then started motioning for us to come out to his van. I told my brother not to, but he went out anyway. I had to follow him to make sure nothing happened. I didn't feel right about this situation. About halfway to his van, I noticed something in the passenger circular window on the back. There was somebody with a ski mask on, barely making themselves visible as they peered out to us. I saw the guy leading us to the van notice him and begin to motion with his hand for the guy to get down. At that moment, I grabbed my little brother and dragged him all the way back in the house. I didn't realize until it was almost too late that the guy was chasing me. I was able to shut the door and lock it. They saw there were no cars in the driveway, so they must have assumed our parents weren't home. The guy started banging and kicking at the door, and by some stroke of luck, a larger man walking with his dog passed by and noticed what was going on. He questioned the guy at the door, which seemed to scare him off. We watched as the van drove down the road out of sight. I was so anxious to tell my dad, even if it meant ratting out my brother, that I ran to my dad's car when he got home to greet him. I then noticed the same van halfway down the block, parked by the entrance of the cul-de-sac down the road. Only for a moment though, before it drove off seconds after I noticed. I haven't actually seen it since, and it's been 3 whole months. I think this was a good lesson for my brother to stop messing around on the web.
This took place around the time those clowns were making headlines across the country. I lived in Kentucky, where the clown group was supposed to be, or a clown group. It all started at night when I was lying in bed, chatting with my friends on Uvu. We were talking about the creepy clown incidents, and how all this crap was probably fake. It was either set up and planned, or it was just people trying to get attention, not actually dangerous. Then another friend tuned in and informed us that cops were just at their local Walmart, about 3 minutes away from my house. He said that there was a clown there, that he had a weapon and was firing at people. I didn't believe him. The next morning, I woke up and I saw the news. Someone actually had gone down to the local Walmart and shot the place up. As I kept watching, apparently, and this is the creepy thing, he was found wearing a clown costume. My mom told me not to worry about it, that it was all fake news, that they were probably blowing out of proportion, and it was nothing more than a kid trying to scare people in a clown costume. If he did have a weapon, it was probably a plastic and realistic looking one, but that wouldn't be as shocking to put on the news. I wasn't sure what to think about that. I went to school and met up with my friends, and while we were there, we ended up talking about what had happened, and we all had chills. The school day went on normally, until fourth period. Fourth period was my favorite class, because it was with Kobe and Jack. All of us were talking about the clowns. Then our teacher caught us and told us to stop talking about it, because we could incite a panic, according to him. Even after the bell rang and we tried to go to the next class, the teacher pulled us aside and told us that we shouldn't be talking about things like that we didn't know what we were talking about. It was weird how freaked out he was just for us mentioning it. Anyway, we moved on to our next classes as usual. It was in one of these classes that I received a text from my friend Jack. It read, "Come to the bathroom. We need to talk about something." I asked my teacher if I could use the bathroom, and he approved. I met Jack there. He looked stunned. He said he got a text from one of his close friends at another middle school about 5 minutes away. He showed it to me. "Dude, we're on full lockdown," it said. "People saw clowns in the schoolyard." Just then, as we were reading this freaky text, the intercom came to life, stating that we were now on lockdown. Me and Jack looked at each other, horrified. Immediately, we sprinted to the nearest classroom. The hallways were empty, and the classroom doors were locked. We put our faces to the window and screamed and pounded on the door. Luckily, the teacher saw us as she was situating the kids in the back of the class away from the windows. We had definitely scared them, but she unlocked the door and let us in. We went to the back of the class with everyone else, and we tried to take our mind off of things. Most of us were on our phones playing games or something. Others were panicking and asking the teacher loads of questions. That's when she confirmed that the other school was in fact on lockdown as well. This was real. Psychos were invading our schools. We waited there in silence and fear for what felt like eternity. But soon and suddenly, we began hearing screaming coming from outside the classroom door. Then there was another stranger sound, like a squeak from a squeaky toy. The doorknob to the classroom began to jiggle, and then it stopped, as if whoever was outside had given up. About 15 minutes later, we were escorted out of the school by cops, fully armed. Waiting on us were some extremely worried and many tearful parents. I never figured out who or what was outside the door, and I can only assume it was one of those creepy, psychotic people in a clown costume. Weeks later, police found an Instagram page with pictures of my school from the date of the lockdown. This had apparently been planned by a group of people. No one had been hurt, but the fact that they wanted to get in the classroom meant that they were looking for students, and what they were going to do with them if they did find them, I have no idea. But it couldn't have been anything good. I've traveled to many places, but my trip to Savannah will always be my most memorable. My friend Mickey and I have always had a love for the supernatural. She loves telling ghost stories, and I've always had a sense for paranormal activity. So when I mentioned I was going to Savannah for my grandma's birthday, a place that's practically crawling with spirits, she was ecstatic. "You have to go on a ghost tour," she yelled happily. "I don't know. I've heard bad stuff can happen on those tours," I nervously replied. "Oh, come on, if you go on one, we'll have more stories to tell," she insisted. "I'll ask Mom," I said. She squealed with excitement. I smiled, but in reality I was scared. Telling stories about the paranormal is fun, but witnessing it is much more terrifying. So the next day I talked to my mom about it. She used to do paranormal investigating, so I figured she would agree. And as I expected, she did. The road trip there was long, maybe 3 or 4 hours. But when we finally got to our hotel, I was practically starving. So we went into a really good restaurant in the hotel and ate. After we finished, we went up to our room to unpack. Now, as a former ghost hunter, I remembered one of my mom's ghost hunting tools. I figured I could at least try to go searching the hotel halls before bed with it, just to make sure I could sleep without being a total chicken. So after asking my mom if I could use it, I grabbed her EMF meter and walked out the door. The halls were completely empty, but still cozy looking. I took a deep breath and began to walk, my eyes staring at the meter. I didn't want to miss a thing. I'd walked 6 doors down until it went from green to yellow to red. Supposedly, green meant the least amount of energy and red being the most. So I did what I always do. I checked for interference. To do that, I pointed it at the walls. The walls were green. The lights were green and the floor was green. But then I pointed it to the door, and that was red. I walked over to another door and pointed the device at that one, but it was green. I felt confused. Maybe I wasn't using it right. So I went to check the red door again, and I felt a cold pressure on my leg, and a chill ran up my back like a cold breeze. So I started walking back to our room, officially and completely creeped out at that point. But in the middle of the hallway, I stopped because I could feel something like a cold hand on my shoulder. And then I heard a whispered voice in my ear, a voice that was disturbingly clear. "Get out." I froze for a few moments, wondering how I could have possibly heard something after just stepping out into the hallway, something angry at that. So it didn't take me long to grab the meter and dash down the hallway back to our room. I was halfway back to the room, running and out of breath. At one point, I couldn't help but look behind me, and then I heard it again. "Get out!" This time, however, when it spoke, I felt breath against my face. I turned and didn't look back again. When I reached our door, I pounded on it so hard that when my mom opened it, she looked at me like I was crazy. I told her everything that had happened, and luckily she believed me, though she seemed jealous that I had encountered something so quickly. All in all, the trip turned out to be the most productive and scary trip I've ever taken. When I got back to school, I told Mickey what happened, and she was happy to have another story to tell. But I told her, I'll tell my stories, but I'm done playing with the paranormal. Supernatural things might seem fun to kids or teenagers, but I hope most of them stay away from supernatural experiences like that. Some people just don't know how dangerous it can be. When I was 18, I worked at a Pizza Hut as a delivery guy. I lived in Tucson, Arizona back then. On one particular delivery, I was sent to a certain road that I'd never been to before, which was strange for me, because in my free time I drove all over Tucson back then. So I took my delivery car and used my GPS to try and find the house. The GPS did not find the place, so I ended up having to use a map I had in the glove department. Finally, I found the house after half an hour of searching. At first, I thought the customer was going to be angry, but when I saw the house, I thought the whole delivery was a joke. The place was boarded up and breaking down. But I chanced it and went to the door and knocked, despite the place giving me chills. At first, I heard nothing in response, After knocking a third time and waiting, I began to hear creaking and an older sounding man coughing from inside the house. I looked through a nearby window and saw about 5 men in their 60s on the other side of the door. All of a sudden, something told me this wasn't a good idea, that I was not supposed to be here. But then the door began opening, and a man stepped outside. When he saw me, he looked into my eyes and said, "Get inside, or we're going to hurt you." I made a split-second decision. With the pizza still in hand, I ran for my car. I felt his arm grasp on the back of my shirt, but he couldn't get a grip. So I made it to my car and floored it out of there. I'd never been so scared or frightened before. No one was around to help in these parts. It was basically the boondocks. I quit my job after that. I'm not going to risk my life just to deliver pizzas on minimum wage. This happened about 2 years ago. I was just getting off of work from an 8 in the morning to 2 p.m. shift at my job. It's a local grocery store, and I was feeling a little beat and needed a place to sit and wait for the bus to come. Normally I used the bus stop closer to my job, but it was the end of the winter, and the bus stop I normally go to didn't have any benches out yet. And you gotta know I needed to sit really bad. I was exhausted, and my back hurt from standing all day. I had to head up to the next bus stop, which was only 2 short blocks away. I sat there once before. It was peaceful and had a very comfy bench, and at the time I was able to get there with some time to spare. But in this case, I wish I'd stayed at the usual stop. I never saw it coming. I'm less than a block away from this bus stop when I see this man, a strange man. I'm guessing he was homeless, but I couldn't smell anything. I could tell right away that he was plastered, which was odd because it was basically the middle of the day. As I walked past him, he said to me, "Hello, friend. Do you have a one I can borrow?" I was kind of startled that he had talked to me at all. I just wanted to walk past and get to my bus stop quickly. I made up my mind and just intended to ignore the guy. I know it sounds rude, but this guy was very obviously drunk. He made Captain Jack Sparrow look sober. Anyway, I continued to walk by the guy, and I saw the bus stop dead ahead, when I heard him say behind me all of a sudden, "Well, fine. I guess you hate me." I wanted to tell him that I don't know him, that I couldn't hate the guy if I've never met him before. I've never seen him in my life. And believe me, I see a lot of homeless people where I work. I made it to the stop at last, and I sat down to my heavenly bench. But unfortunately, not 2 minutes later, who should stumble by to the bus stop? The homeless drunk man. He sits down next to me and asks me, "So, why do you hate me?" I was getting fed up and frustrated. I just wanted to relax. I didn't want to talk to this weird man. So I decided to speak my mind. I said to him, "Sir, I do not know you." I know this was pointless arguing with a drunk, but sometimes a man needs to speak his mind. He replied with, "But you still hate me." I answered, "I can't hate you if I don't know you, sir." "Then, do you want some vodka?" "Sir, I don't drink, not at 2 in the afternoon," I replied. "You're cute," he followed up with. "Would you please just leave me alone?" It was at this point I had realized another person had come to the bus stop, a woman. Since I didn't have a cell phone on myself, I went up and told her what was happening. She had apparently heard some of the conversation, as she was 1 step ahead of me. She took her phone out and began to dial the cops. When I turned back to the strange man looming over me, he was now holding the biggest knife I had ever seen. I mean, he barely had any clothes on. I had no idea where he pulled this knife from. It was one of those deadly-looking Bowie knives. "Aw, come on, why you gotta be like that?" he said. and he sounded really angry. And the look on his face told me he could do anything at any second. This guy was a crazy drunk. There's no telling what he would do if we set him off any further. Luckily, the bus arrived that very second, and I basically threw myself on board, along with the woman. Away from the man who didn't follow us inside. I don't think he had the capacity to at that point. The woman dialed the police, and I watched as the man passed out on the bus stop bench, the knife falling to the concrete ground. When I saw that, when I finally felt safe again, I couldn't help but think that that was a close one. I still ride the bus back and forth to work. That man may have been harmless, I don't know, but with a weapon like that, and with his judgment completely clouded, I wasn't going to take the chance. Thankfully, I've never seen that grease rat again. Be careful at the bus stops. You never know what kind of strangers you'll run into.